Welcome into the Plus Studio. I'm Isaiah Kim Martinez, joined by Republican Kentucky Senate President Robert Stivers. Senate President, it is so good to see you. Thanks for taking a few minutes here today.
Glad to be with you.
So there's a lot to talk about. Obviously, we were in full campaign season, but I know you don't want to talk about that first. Let's talk about the legislative session, the budget session. You guys were able to iron out a budget for the next 2 years here in Kentucky. Going into this year, there were talks about this lean budget, right? This concept of uncertainty on a federal level, global level. Do you feel like this was was there restraint practiced in the spending? Because I know different members felt different things about that.
Yeah, there was, but there was pragmatics use of our time and our resources. And when you say a strained budget, it's almost like we dealt with two different budgets. One, the operational budget, which is recurring, that was very tight. There's no doubt about that. But then we've accumulated over the past several years a large budget reserve trust fund, which was basically what we call the 900 bill, House Bill 900, which was a surplus expenditure plan that invested in various things throughout the state.
Mm-hmm. And one of those things was Louisville. I mean,
a lot.
This mayor consistently works with you guys, it sounds like, to get money for downtown. And it sounds like, what was it, over $100 million just in downtown projects? Or?
Yeah, and it came from various things. And it was the mayor. You know, let's talk about the tip of the spear. It's the mayor. It's his group, you know, Dana Mayton and Julie Carr talking with us, but also Paul Humphreys and Emily McKinley over at the LMPD and individuals like Rebecca Flashaker and Cleo Battle, all different things. Dan Mann out at the airport, a lot of different things, a lot of different people, but the tip of the spear was definitely the mayor.
Mm-hmm. And there were a lot of elements to this funding. Obviously, the Belvedere, which is right by the river there in Louisville, got more money. I believe it was it the community care campus that got more money as well? I mean, walk me through sort of the elements of where this money is going.
Yeah, there's different sources. So, the mayor wanted to be able to have some flexibility, but some constraints. He's wanting to work on the homeless issue, which gets back into public protection, which ties back into all the people I've talked about. So we wanted to deal with that. And I think that's being operated and managed by VOA and Jennifer Hans-Cox Group. So there was discussions with them. So we set those parameters of 6 areas, and I think we put $90 million into that pool. We put some additional money into the Fair and Exposition Center as they finish up. We dealt with the airport because they need money to expand,
right.
Plus revenue guarantees, opening up new routes, particularly focused on the West Coast. Again, back to the chief and the deputy chief, the regional training center, which will impact Jefferson County plus the contiguous counties. So we went through all those types of things that are more governmental functions. But then we also looked at some of the other things like the Louisville Ballet, with Teddy Abrams and the orchestra, the Louisville Orchestra, which now are not just going to be in Louisville. Teddy's made a great statement taking that out into the state, and hopefully they coordinate and do things like that with the ballet.
You mentioned there are so many projects going on in Louisville right now, but then there are the projects to be, which include the Humana building. The mayor has a plan to totally reconvert that into a convention-style hotel. We know there were incentives in the revenue bill this session for Humana and for Valhalla. Can you explain what kind of impact that's going to have?
Actually, there was 3 types of incentives. One, Valhalla, the owners out there, and I hope I pronounce this right, Kirchdorfer?
It's funny. I saw you guys together at the Senate offices, and I was like, wait, that's Jimmy Kirchdorfer. I wonder what's about to happen. Then a few days later, we got that.
Yeah, the need of that was some incentives to try to lure the PGA back to Valhalla in 2036. So we're not thinking in 2-year increments. Sometimes we have to think in 5, 10, 15, and 20-year increments. But for him to make that pitch, he needed certain incentives. And we don't lose any money. You've got to actually get it. and a dollar has to be spent. So that was one. Secondly was, the renovation of the Humana building and conversion into a 1,000-room hotel, 50,000-foot ballroom, and I think he's worked with that with the Poe companies and Steve and that group, and Hank and the crew over there. And then there was another one which the mayor and I were more focused on. There was some what we call the urban core revitalization, which would allow for some of the buildings you see here that are unoccupied for developers to go in there and get the same type of historic tax credits that would apply, but they don't qualify to be historic buildings. But if they were unoccupied, they could come back in and show that they have certain square footage or certain stories and have been unoccupied at a 50% level or greater for more than 3 years. You would be afforded the opportunity to create a new dynamic in that building among 3 uses: residential, commercial, or retail. And so that looks at the Hayburn building, the Starks building, the Brown and Williamson building, those buildings like that, that are empty and not really useful, and a couple of them have sold recently, to be renovated for multiple purposes. And try to create a bigger dynamic in downtown Louisville.
Is your understanding that that's going to be mixed use or housing?
It has to be.
Has to be.
That's one of the criteria to be afforded the tax credits. You have to use 2 of the 3 that I've listed. It can be all 3, commercial, retail, or residential, but it has to be some combination of at least 2 of the 3 uses.
Has the mayor given you an idea and sort of his vision for that?
Yeah, he's going to open it up or try to open it up to different individuals. And hopefully the vision would be, hey, down on the first floor, you would have restaurants, you would have retail, clothing stores, maybe a couple floors, very similar to what they did in Detroit. And retail grocery stores, things like that, to make urban core living easier so you don't have to drive 10 or 15 minutes. Next, office space. But then the big use, and we talked about that, somewhere maybe between 1,000 to 1,500 units opened up in residential, taking the top part to be newly formed condos or residences in downtown.
Real quick, I want to touch on the comment that you made. I might have heard you wrong. Did you say that Jimmy Kirchdorfer, I got to say it right, is trying to get the PGA Championship back to Louisville in 2036?
Yes.
That is big news. I don't think we've heard that anywhere. I mean, talk to me about that effort. It sounded to many folks that felt like 2024 was the last year.
They announce, just like you hear the various horse races, not the Derby or the Preakness, they announce the venue just like 5 and 6 and 8, 10 years out.
Yep.
Same thing with the Super Bowl. Same thing with the NCAA Final Four. They have to plan this years out, and he needed these types of incentives to make a pitch to bring it back to Louisville.
Because it takes off sales tax in a lot of cases, right? So he believes that how would that help bring them back?
Well, first of all, understand what a sales tax credit is. If you sell something for $10, you have to pay a 6% sales tax. Well, without them coming back here, you're not going to sell PGA items. But if they do come back and they do sell them, then the sales tax goes back to the PGA. So it helps offset and defer their costs of putting on that type of event in whatever place they may go, be it in Louisville or be it in Georgia, be it in Indiana, be it, wherever. Those are the types of incentives, and you have to be competitive with other states and other places that are promoting to get events like that.
Really interesting. We'll see kind of how that develops and what happens there. I want to move on a little bit to a couple more sort of big items in the legislative session, especially as it relates to education in Louisville. Senate Bill 1, Senate Bill 4, both having to do with some of the state's largest school districts, namely JCPS. Let's start with the board shakeup. I know Jason Nemes, I've talked to him about this. He was sort of crafting this. Why was this so neat? Why did the emergency clause need to come into play and totally put every seat up for grabs?
Well,
we're talking about the school board. By the way.
I know the school board.
Yeah, just for the viewers,
Just look at the headlines and what you all are reporting about the attainment levels, the functions from a financial management level, the shortfalls that are there, the I guess, lack of good, consistent vision for the future, there needs to be something done. And this is not something that we've just brought up. This has been well reported by virtually every media, be it print or radio or TV media, about the problems in JCPS. And that's 1/6 of our school-age population in this state. So we feel we need to do some things to change it. We want to see the two things we want to see: safety and attainment levels. And that's not too much to ask. But now you're seeing almost something identical. The attainment levels are better in the Fayette County public school system. They're talking about a $75 million loan to get over their fiscal crisis. So you're seeing this in our two biggest school systems in the state. And we, as policymakers, that's our job. One thing that's Constitution, we are to provide a common scheme of schools. And they should be providing quality education attainment levels, and a safe environment for kids to go to.
The NAACP here in Louisville, their president told me that they believe these new maps, the 5, don't allow for a majority-minority district, which that goes all into sort of the Voting Rights Act, Section 2. But I wanted to kind of get your response to that, because I did hear that was thought about when drawing these maps, and I also heard that the maps were actually drawn by 2 Democrats in the state house. I mean, do you push back on that claim that it wouldn't allow for a majority-minority district?
I don't know that we ever took that into consideration, at least not from my perspective. We're looking at something that would make a difference to the system as a whole. And I'm going to say this: we did some things working with the University of Louisville, their education department. You saw $1.3 million for a numeracy and literacy clinic. That's to go to places where the attainment level are not reaching the goals they should be, because if you're not at level in 3rd or 4th grade, then your trajectory throughout the rest of the school and your schooling becomes severely hampered. So working with the University of Louisville, who will work with Simmons College, there'll be some interventions for 3rd and 4th graders, basically focused towards the West End.
I wanted to also bring up Senator Mitch McConnell's statue. That was an effort that you helped spearhead.
Very much.
I believe you had told other outlets that you have private donors. There's interest for private money. I mean, do you have private money / donors lined up already?
They are lined up, and that was part of the legislation. It has to be privately sourced, not government dollars used on it.
So you already have folks. Do you feel like you have the
Yes.
people necessary? The money's
Yes.
not going to be an issue?
Not an issue.
Have you picked a sculptor? I was curious.
That won't be for me.
Okay.
That's beyond my field of
purview.
expertise.
Yeah. Fair enough. We're going to move on to a bill, Senate Bill 199, that has to do with liability for farmers, or specifically pesticide manufacturers. We know this is a big topic across the country. We see different states passing legislation. I think Kentucky's only of 3 or 4 that went ahead and passed it this session. Why was this so necessary?
Because you're getting requirements from the federal government, and they're saying this is what you have to label this. This is what you're required to label on these products. But when you're following federal government mandates of labeling, then these producers, who many of these products are used primarily in the western part of our state, corn, soybean, other things of that nature, they're like, wait a minute, this is what we're required to put on there. These are the criteria that the federal government puts on us. So after we comply with the federal law, how do you sue us then? And so that was to make sure you understood the difference between the labeling and what they're required to do, and that if they follow the federal guidelines, the federal mandates, that you can't sue somebody then. Mm-hmm. You can't litigate on whether there is some issue with it because they have followed federal law and federal regulations.
So essentially, if a pesticide manufacturer is following the EPA, the standard, and they put that on the bottle, this bill would essentially make it so that is essentially bulletproof. That is good enough.
That's the attempt that this legislation does.
What would you say to critics who say, well, then how do we protect, potentially families from what could be correlated side effects. It hasn't been proven yet, but
and this is
cancer,
where
other diseases.
And that's part of the discussion. This is the role of the federal government, be it for a new drug through the FDA, be it for something like this in the realm of a pesticide or a chemical used in farming operations. I can even go to this. There was the Fourth and Oak project, Brownsfield mitigation that has been cleaned up, and there's been a certificate by the EPA and the state that it's cleaned up. Once you get that, basically the seal of approval from the governing entity that you've done all you can do and it is safe, then how can you be held liable? If there's a problem with the federal or state process, then let's go back and change the federal or state process. Let's look at, for a drug, the FDA. Let's look at the EPA if there is something related to a pesticide. That's where you need to go back, because this is not something that's exclusively used in Kentucky. It's used across the United States. So you have to have the consistent rules. You can't have patchwork type of rules and regulations.
Moving off the legislative session, just a few more topics here. I wanted to reference the University of Kentucky, this new dean that had been chosen, and then the governor, Democrat Andy Beshear of Kentucky, took issue not just with the selection, but also with this contract for the former athletic director at UK, Mitch Barnhart, and this sort of unspecified role. It seems like the dean has been the more controversial issue, just by the way the university sort of has talked about it and how Republicans across the state have. What would you say to the governor and sort of some of his criticisms on how the dean was chosen?
Well, it's interesting because if people remember back a few years ago when Matt Bevin basically abolished the University of Louisville board, Southern Association of Colleges and Schools came in and put U of L on probation. I'm the one that sponsored and rewrote all the legislation about how removal of board members should be done, working with what we call SACs, a lady by the name of Belle Whelan, and then Attorney General Andy Beshear was extremely critical about how the governor was interfering with boards. But now he's doing the same thing he criticized Matt Bevin for. Excuse me. But here's what I think was happening. There is no doubt in my mind that the former athletic director, Mitch Barnhart, giving him that contract was extremely unpopular. So I think the governor took that and used it as a sledgehammer to try to go after the dean of the law school. Can you tell me who the dean of the U of L Law School is? Most people don't know.
Off my head, no.
Well, why does the governor go after Greg Van Tatenhove, a former federal judge, when nobody pays attention really to who the dean is? And in fact, I think Mr. Rosenberg, who was the school's named after, and Charles English, former ABA and KBA Bar Association presidents, said Van Tatenhove's a good choice. But the governor went after him. Why? Why did he basically combine the two issues to try to make a point? Would it have been because Greg Van Tatenhove was the federal judge that ruled against all of his COVID protocols that were taken to federal court? Like, you can't give a ticket to somebody for going to church. Van Tatenhove struck those down. So he interferes into a process in a way that he criticized 6 or 7 years ago. But a lot of us believe he used that issue with Barnhart to go after Van Tatenhove because he ruled against him and is considered a Republican, and he wants somebody else other than a Republican being the leader of the law school. And if you go back and do a little bit of research, I think he may have injected himself into the temporary dean, who was the constitutional law professor there, Paul Salamanca, and expressed his criticism about him. So he was defined as a conservative person. Governor didn't want that.
Staying on Bashir real quick, the gas tax order, he gave a couple, one to freeze the increase in July, the other to reduce it 10 cents by, I believe it's Monday of next week. The Attorney General, Russell Coleman, signed off on that. Your thoughts on his effort?
I understand what he's trying to do. It's more of a political statement. We all know that what has driven this is not a tax. It's the national and international markets that drive the costs of gasoline. And more than likely, if this continues, you're not going to see a drop in price. You'll probably see an increase in price. So how does he explain that? That, oh, wait a minute, I dropped it 10 cents, but the price still keeps going up? Or I've stopped a freeze or frozen an increment increase, but the price still goes up? The price of gasoline is determined by global markets, not by tax rates.
Wanted to ask a couple campaign questions. I know that's not your favorite topic, but
I'm glad to.
There's a lot happening right now.
You think I'm an apolitical person?
Well, I guess it depends on whether we're in session or not.
Okay.
Indiana, just to mention for a second, that caught a lot of national headlines. There are Republican leaders in that state who got wiped off the map in basically 12 hours from Trump-endorsed candidates because they did not redraw congressional maps in Indiana. Does that give any kind of fear to you as the Senate leader here in Kentucky that something could happen here if the White House was ever to come back and say, you know what, we do want that one Democratic district y'all have?
Well, actually, I had a discussion with several members of the White House administration about this. And I saw what happened in Indiana, and I know the leader of the Indiana Senate, Rod Bray. I don't know many of the members up there, but I do know Rod.
And he stood in the way of that effort.
Well, and he voted what his caucus, people think that I run the Senate. Look, I am really a reflection, and some of my opinions and beliefs have to take a back seat. I'm a reflection of the makeup of the Senate. That's what I have to portray and represent. So Rod was doing the same thing. He is a reflection in doing what his Senate members wanted to do. In this, they didn't do the redistricting. Then that's what you get judged on. That's what you get graded on. And the voting public decided they wanted to go a different direction, mainly because of that issue. So people lost their seats. That's the political way. That's the process. Now the question becomes, how many of those individuals will win an election in the fall when everybody votes? So it's the tough world we live in, and we all know that something like that can cause you political problems. And it may not be that issue. It may be a gas tax issue. It may be a road issue. It may be something that's global. It may be statewide, or it may be a local issue. And you've got to be conscious and aware of that. As to my discussions with the White House, when they brought that subject up to me before the session, we talked about 1992. That was when the Democrats did the redistricting, trying to beat Hal Rogers in his district, the 5th, by taking a bunch of Republican counties out of it and moving them into the 1st and 2nd district. Well, by doing that, they actually put enough Republicans in those districts that Ron Lewis and Ed Whitfield won. It backfired on them. And they didn't beat Hal Rogers either. So instead of accomplishing what they did, they actually got the opposite. This is Morgan McGarvey's seat here in Louisville. I caution them about pushing that because if you take that concentration of Democrat votes, you may have the same type of result you had in 92, not accomplishing what you want, but actually doing something totally opposite. And I think they probably took that into consideration.
I remember you telling me that story and that conversation that you had with the White House. Now, quite a bit has changed, though, and we do know how short people's memories can be sometimes, where they might hear that, but then they see the Voting Rights Act ruling by the Supreme Court. Then they see sort of how successful they were in getting these lawmakers out in Indiana. What if they come back and say, hey, we hear you, but no, we want you to go ahead and redraw the map, make it 6-0? What would your response be?
Again, you've got to be cautious about what you do. Not too long in the past, you got to remember Andy Bars, the 6th Congressional District was held by Ben Chandler. that is a swing district. This is not a swing district. This is a pretty solid Democrat district that Morgan holds. And so and Morgan understands that this is the political nature. We may do it, but guess what? We may wind up losing 2 seats instead of picking up 1. Mm-hmm. And so we just have to, and
is it case closed?
No, nothing's ever on these types of things, but
because we see Tennessee trying to make 9-0.
Well, we can't come back into session to do it. Nothing can happen between now and the fall for us.
I just mean for the future, 27, 28.
It would have to be for the next set of congressional elections, which would be in 28, not in 27.
But it doesn't sound like you're interested.
No, it's we got to be cautious. Things like this tend to have the ability to have political backfire on people and places. So you just don't know what's happening. No, I'm always intrigued by the politics of the situation, but you want to make sure if you're going to do something, you get the results you expect to get. Mm-hmm.
Real quick, the U.S. Senate race. Are you leaning a certain way? We know the Trump endorsement sort of like changed the game here. I mean, what's your take on it, and who do you favor?
Well, first of all, I know all the candidates. Well, the 3 main candidates. Now there's 2 since Nate Morris has pulled out. I've known Nate for several years, but not as well as I've known Daniel, and not as well as I've known Andy Barr. I've known Andy Barr for 20-plus years. He was deputy general counsel in the Fletcher administration. So I've known Andy for a long time, and I'm not going to say anything bad about the other 2. It's just I've known Andy. And something I learned early on in my career, you may not be against somebody. And I'm not against anybody in this race. I'm just for someone, and that's Andy Barr. I think because of his experience, I'm not a term limits person. I think experience matters. Because of his experience in Washington, he has the ability to really step in to the Senate and know how it works and be more effective because he's got 10 years under his belt in the House and he understands how D.C. works.
Senate President Robert Stivers, thank you so much for coming in. We appreciate it.
Glad to. Anytime.